Good evening. I send a warm greeting to you. On this occasion, I want to tell you about something that happened to me in 2011 when I was still serving as a municipal police officer in the state of Puebla. That night, I was on patrol with my partner Luna. We called him that because that was his last name. Well, that night we were assigned to cover a patrol route on the outskirts of the San Miguel neighborhood over where the state penitentiary is located. For those who know this place, and for those who don't, I must mention that the area is quite desolate, as it is far outside the city. I sent you some images I obtained through Google Maps so you can see what the place looked like back then, when it was even more deserted than it is today. In fact, this image shows the exact spot where all of this happened. Now, back to the story. That dawn seemed like any other where my colleague and I were on our routine. I have always said that this sector has a very strange atmosphere. I suppose it is because everything is so lonely, and the penitentiary makes it even more eerie. It was about 2:30 inches the morning when we saw a shadow moving in the distance down the street. In fact, the image you are seeing right now is the exact place where we saw that, which we found quite strange. And this image corresponds to the year 2011, the very year when it all happened. When we saw that, I thought it might be a drunk person or someone returning from work at such a late hour. But when we focused the patrol lights, we realized that what we were seeing was an elderly lady, about 60 or 70 years old, walking completely barefoot with her feet covered in dirt, wearing torn and loose clothing on the sidewalk. When we saw her, her behavior struck us as strange, as she was moving her hands a lot as if she were arguing or talking with someone, but the lady was completely alone. I swear to you, it really looked as if she were fighting with someone. As soon as we saw that, my partner Luna said, "What about that lady? It's not the time for her to be out so late. Could she be lost or in danger?" And he was right. That part of the neighborhood is almost unlit and near the penitentiary, and although it is not mentioned much, there are strange people hiding in the bushes around there. That is why we approached slowly, slowed down, and as soon as we shone the light properly on her, the lady stopped as if she had been waiting for us. She had long, gray, matted hair, and her eyes looked very lost, as if they were bulging. But what freaked us out the most was how she spoke. She didn't articulate words well. Rather, she whispered as if she were praying in a low voice, but with an intermittent, sickly tone, something that made your skin crawl just hearing it. We got out to ask her if she was okay, but the lady just kept repeating that she was going to her daughter's house while pointing towards some houses further ahead. I listened to her, and I swear to you something didn't add up about that woman. It wasn't her words, it wasn't her way of being. It was as if she were hiding something she didn't want to tell us yet, and she wouldn't stop moving her lips to one side as if she were murmuring to someone invisible. I turned to look at Luna and told him with my eyes that we shouldn't let her keep walking alone. So, we told the lady to get into the patrol car, and we would take her to her daughter's house. The lady accepted without any major problem, but when she got into the back of the vehicle, I noticed something I will never forget. As soon as we closed the door, the old lady made a gesture of annoyance. She turned toward the window, leaned slightly, and began to speak in a low voice, but not to us. It was to the empty seat next to her, as if someone were sitting there, but there was no one. That really made me tense, because the old lady wasn't drunk or high, but she was definitely dissociated, like someone who already lives in their own reality. Throughout the trip, she kept murmuring, moving her fingers as if counting something or as if receiving orders. Luna looked at me and said very quietly, "This lady is not well." Seriously, I don't know how she was walking so late on that road. I just nodded because it was more than clear that he was right. After a few minutes, we arrived at the address the lady gave us. It was a simple little house with an old gate and a flickering yellow light. We knocked hard, and a woman of about 30 or so came out, sleepy and with fearful eyes, just at the sight of the patrol car. We told her it wasn't anything bad. On the contrary, we brought her mother because we found her walking alone on the street. But before the lady could say anything, something terrifying happened. As soon as we opened the back door, the old woman came out like a demon. The woman went at her daughter like a beast, as if she wanted to kill her. She did it with a force that made no sense for someone of her age and build. She was screaming things we didn't understand, but they sounded like curses. The daughter screamed in despair, and we had to restrain the old woman between the two of us. I swear to you, community, I had never felt anything like that. The woman's skin was ice cold, and her hands were clenching her fingers like claws, something that didn't seem human at that moment. When we finally managed to control her, the daughter began to cry. She told us that her mother was admitted to the psychiatric hospital right next door in San Miguel, that she suffered from severe schizophrenia, and that she had no idea how she had escaped from that place. She always says that the voices that accompany her send her to find me, but that voice always tells them to hurt me, the young woman said with a trembling voice. My partner and I were left scared and thoughtful, as we didn't know exactly what was happening, but we had no choice but to verify what she had told us. So, we took the elderly lady back to the psychiatric hospital, and when we arrived there, we confirmed that yes, she had indeed escaped during the early morning. We handed her over, signed some papers, but before we left, while the nurse was checking her in, the old woman stared at us from the hallway and moved her lips again, whispering something toward us. I swear that for a second, just for one cursed second, I felt as if someone else were watching us from that hallway even though there was only a wall. Sometimes I think that woman cursed us or something because it felt horrible, like a chill that was born in my feet and died in my head. Sometimes I think the most disturbing things don't always happen with ghosts, but with the living. If you are enjoying the stories, I invite you to leave us a like and subscribe to this great paranormal family. We continue. CH family, my name is Rosa, and I want to tell you something that happened to me in 2014 when I was still working as a police officer on a route through some very old streets in Guadalajara. Before starting the story, let me tell you that I am a fan of the channel, and for months I had wanted to send my account, but because of work, I didn't have time. But well, here I am, and I hope you like it or are terrified by it. Honestly, I don't know which is better. This begins like this: community. At that time, I was assigned to night patrols in a neighborhood that always gave me a bad feeling called Lomas de la Victoria, a somewhat forgotten neighborhood with dirt roads, poles that barely provided light, and few, but very few, inhabited houses at that time. During the day, nothing happened, but at night it had a strange atmosphere, as if all the shadows moved more than normal and the dogs barked at things one could not see. It all started one dawn. I remember it perfectly, around 0 inches the morning when I was going down the main avenue, where there was an old pole with a metal cross stuck to the base, the kind they put up when someone dies. When I passed by in the patrol car with the high beams on, there was a man on his knees in front of the cross, completely motionless. It was as if he had been there for hours. I remember the man had a worn-out brown jacket, his neck was hunched forward and his hands were together as if praying. The poor man looked tired, but he didn't give me a bad feeling. On the contrary, he seemed like someone suffering from a loss. I even thought he might be the father or brother of the possible victim. In my line of work, one sees many such crosses along the way, but one never sees someone praying at such late hours. Still, I didn't stop. I just slowed down and looked at him for a few seconds before continuing on my way as I was on duty. The next day, or rather the next night, at the same hour, I passed by that exact same point, and there was that man again, kneeling in exactly the same position without moving a single centimeter. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the man worked at night and stopped to pray before getting home, but 3, 4, or 5 nights went by and I always saw him there without fail, regardless of whether it was cold or raining. And he was always praying at that cross, always in the brown jacket, always kneeling, always looking very pained. I swear there were moments when I felt something wasn't right, because his posture never varied, and even though I passed by with the patrol car, I never managed to see his face well. He always had his head inclined toward that cross. After almost 2 weeks like this, one night my curiosity got the better of me. I stopped a few meters away with the patrol car, then got out slowly so as not to scare him and said something to that man. "Good evening. Tell me, sir, are you okay? I have seen you here several times praying, and it just makes me curious to know what you are doing." The man got up slowly, almost without making a sound, and when he looked at me, I felt a pressure in my chest that I cannot explain. The man had a tired face, as if he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red not from irritation, but rather as if he had been crying for a long time. Afterward, he said to me in a very soft but very sad voice, "I pray to my son's cross, my young boy, for here they killed him." Upon hearing that, I was left speechless. I apologized for bothering him and told him that if he needed help, I could assist him, whether it was taking him home or filing a report in case one hadn't been filed. but he only shook his head and knelt back down to continue praying. After that, I left him there, feeling bad for having interrupted him. That night I kept thinking about him, about his pain, and I even promised myself to bring him a candle the next time I saw him praying there as always. A few days later, during the afternoon, I happened to do that route again, but this time with the sun out. When I arrived at the pole, I saw a young woman about 20 years old placing fresh flowers at the base of that cross. Seeing that, I felt bad about what had happened and wanted to apologize to this relative as well. So, I stopped because I thought she might be a relative, a daughter or sister of the man who had passed away. I approached calmly and said, "Good afternoon." I asked her if she was a relative of the man who came to pray every night. When I said that, the girl's face froze. She looked at me as if she had heard something impossible and then said, "Sir? What, sir?" I described him exactly as he was. Brown jacket, thin, sad eyes, always kneeling, praying. I was barely halfway through the description when the girl brought her hands to her mouth and then her eyes filled with tears. Yes, I am a relative of the man you describe. I think it is my grandfather." It was then that I told her what had happened to me days before, but before I could continue, the young woman interrupted me and said, "Listen, but my grandfather died 5 years ago. My grandfather passed away years ago, and just like you describe him, is how people saw him come to pray when he was alive at his son's grave." Community, when I heard that, my blood ran cold. I remained completely frozen, mute, not knowing what to say. The young woman kept crying while explaining to me that her grandfather had spent his final years visiting the cross, that he never missed, that he was always praying there. But after his death, none of the family had been around at night because it made them sad to remember that. Then the young woman showed me a photograph she had on her phone, and it was him, the same man I had seen kneeling night after night. But, community, I swear I cannot explain what I had seen, because I had seen him as a normal person, not as a deceased one. I saw someone of flesh and blood for days, not a ghost. The strangest thing about all this is that days later, I never saw that man again. I passed many nights through that stretch, sometimes afraid of seeing him again, but the place remained completely empty forever. He never appeared to me again. And every time I pass by that cross, I can't help but feel that someone is there, clinging to the memory of his son, praying to him, even if he no longer belongs to this world. That night, it became clear to me that ghosts exist, but they don't always look like they do in movies or series. Often they look like you or me. I remind you that we have daily videos and live shows every Wednesday and Saturday night. Thank you very much for your support. We continue. I have an uncle named Mateo who is currently 65 years old, but for more than 40 years he was a police officer, and in all that time some very dark things happened to him. He was always one of those firm, brave, tough-as-nails men who never accepted help. But well, this story is a bit different from what you would expect. Community, I ask all of you, do you believe in miracles? Or, put another way, do you believe in Santeria? Well, whatever your answer is, listen to this and then tell me what you think. According to what is said, this happened one dawn when my Uncle Mateo and his partner responded to an emergency call in a neighborhood known for having very dangerous and heavily armed people. According to that report, they were armed men lurking around a warehouse. My uncle and his partner entered confidently, thinking it was just a normal check, but inside there were 4 subjects waiting for them, as if it were an ambush. They say the shootout was intense, that bullets were bouncing everywhere, and that my uncle, in an attempt to cover his partner, received a shot in the chest and another in his side. The criminals escaped, and his partner called for reinforcements, screaming that Mateo was bleeding out. That dawn, they took him to the hospital almost lifeless. I remember having arrived with my parents at dawn at the hospital upon learning of the tragedy, and I remember perfectly seeing the face of my Aunt Sonia, my Uncle Mateo's wife. I still have it very present to this day. She had a pale face, dark circles under her eyes, and was practically without tears. The doctors took him directly to intensive care. He was connected to machines everywhere, and they told us the next 48 hours were decisive in knowing whether he would survive or not. Those were horrible days where we all spoke in low voices as if a loud noise could bring bad news. I heard my aunts praying, his police colleagues coming to see him, the doctors explaining to my aunt the severe damage he had, that they were doing everything possible, but they didn't promise anything to anyone. It was at that point that my Aunt Sonia did something no one else would have dared to do, and she did it out of love, I believe. One night, without telling anyone, she simply disappeared. She only left word that she was going to seek help and nothing more, but she never specified where. Later, she herself told us that she went to a witch she had known for years, an elderly woman who lived on the outskirts of the city, one of those people others avoided dealing with because they said she knew more than she should, one of those called real witches. My aunt arrived begging her to save my Uncle Mateo's life, that she didn't want to be left a widow and that her children were the ones who needed him most. The witch listened without moving, without blinking almost, as if she knew Sonia was going to come looking for her. The witch told her she would help her, but the price would not be paid by her, but by my uncle. My aunt accepted without fully understanding that, and the woman began to work immediately. My aunt never wanted to repeat to us everything she saw that night. She only said that the witch lit black candles, that she burned herbs that smelled very bad, like hot metal. And while that was happening, she murmured things in a language that wasn't Spanish, and apparently spoke with someone invisible who was there in that room, but whom my aunt couldn't see. The only thing she did tell us was the last phrase she heard coming out of the witch's mouth. "It is done. He will not die, but he will not return alone from death." The next day, the doctors said that inexplicably my Uncle Mateo had shown an improvement that even they couldn't explain. His heart was reacting quickly, the wounds looked less inflamed, and although he remained critical, he was no longer in a state of death. After that, it took several weeks for him to wake up, of course. But he did wake up, and when he did, we cried, thanking God, the doctors, everyone we could thank. I remember my Aunt Sonia looking at her husband with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of relief, but also fear. My uncle returned home months later, walking and trying to return to his normal life, but from the first day we noticed that he had something different. Because he never spoke about the witch, because my Aunt Sonia told him what she had done, and he didn't speak about the hospital, but suddenly he would stay staring fixedly at a corner of his living room as if he saw someone who wasn't there. Sometimes he would turn off the television because he said he heard whispering behind him as if someone were calling him. He wasn't scared, but he did tense up a lot as if he felt someone was following him. And one time I asked him if he was okay, and he only told me, "No, I'm not okay, son. Since I came back from death, I feel like someone else came with me. I feel like I brought a little ghost from there." He said it with a calm that made me more nervous than I would have expected. I didn't know why he told me exactly that, but over time my uncle told me that during the time he was between life and death, he felt someone grabbing his shoulder, someone holding him when he fell, and pulling him back when his heart stopped for moments. My uncle says he has never known who that person was who was taking care of him during that trance, but he could feel it, and this person or entity was preventing him from dying. Even at times, he questioned it and thought it was God preventing him from dying, although I think it wasn't him. Over time, he made it very clear that what was with him wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. It was like a silent watcher who wouldn't leave, who was always behind him, glued to his shadow, breathing down his neck, taking care of him, or perhaps following him, waiting for him to die so that one day he could claim his soul. My aunt, every time she heard her husband say that, would just shudder as if remembering the deal she made that night with that witch. My uncle is still alive today, thanks to God, and thanks to the witch who also brought him back from death. Over time, of course, my aunt had to tell everything she did, but no one judged her. On the contrary, the whole family thanked her for it. But for years, when I go to his house, there is always an inexplicable chill in his hallway. And every time I walk around his home, I feel as if someone or something is around there, because I swear to God that on more than one occasion I have seemed to see a second shadow behind my uncle. And that's not all. It seems that something haunts his house, something that is not human and something that is not from God. Hello, CH family. My name is Isabel, but everyone calls me Isa. The email I sent contains a story that happened to my brother-in-law, Leonardo, who gave me authorization to tell it to you. First of all, let me tell you that my brother-in-law has been a police officer in the state of Tlaxcala for years, and this happened to him in 2019, when he was temporarily assigned to guard the old hallways of a small, abandoned prison on the outskirts of the city. This prison, from what he tells me, has been gradually emptying as they have been transferring inmates to a much larger prison. My brother-in-law, Leonardo, was one of those people who was never scared of anything. He had dealt with drunks, fights, failed riots, pursuits, and all kinds of problems that accumulate in an officer's notebook with several years of service. But what he lived inside that old penitentiary is something he doesn't share with practically anyone, because what lives there are not criminals, it's something worse, something that doesn't belong to this world. It all started when they assigned him to guard the pavilion that had been closed since the ADS. That part of the prison was no longer used because the facilities were very damaged and supposedly it wasn't safe to be there. But what everyone knew, even though no one said it out loud, was that that place was loaded with a very strange history. Because, as they say, community, it is said that a woman who never had an official record had died inside one of the rooms without anyone being able to explain how she got there. It was never known if she was a relative of some prisoner, a visitor, or simply someone who snuck in without permission. All that was known was that one dawn they found her lying on the floor with her hands tensed, as if she had been scratching the wall, and her mouth slightly open as if she had been screaming until she ran out of air. Since then, many guards avoid talking about her, and those who enter that room do so in a hurry without looking around much. Leonardo, my brother-in-law, didn't know all that when they assigned him there, so he thought it would be a simple shift, but the first night he felt something very strange. He said that as soon as he crossed the metal grate, the air changed completely. It wasn't cold air, it was rather heavy air, as if the place were breathing very slowly, pushing back. In the distance he heard what he thought was sobbing, like the soft cry of a woman, but it didn't sound very loud. He thought maybe it was the few inmates who were still hiding and who presumably could be doing drugs or couldn't sleep. So he walked in that direction to find out what it was about. But the further he advanced, the more he realized that that cry didn't come from a single point. It was as if it bounced off the walls, as if it moved around him. At a certain moment, he stopped because he heard footsteps right behind him, soft, almost dragging footsteps. He turned around thinking it was another officer, but there was no one. But the following days were worse. Every shift he was assigned to that area, Leonardo returned home pale, quieter, and more nervous than ever. His wife noticed and asked him what was going on, but he didn't want to tell her because he said no one would believe him. It was like that until one night when he couldn't keep it to himself anymore, and he told her that on several occasions, while checking the hallways of the penitentiary, he would see the silhouette of a woman standing at the end of the corridor. A woman with long hair and her body hunched forward. He says she didn't walk, she didn't speak, she was just there. But when he blinked, she would disappear and appear closer, as if she advanced without moving. Once he saw her clearly. He says she was about 7 meters from him with bare feet, arms hanging down, and grayish skin as if she had no blood. Leonardo stepped back, aiming with his flashlight, and at that moment the woman tilted her head to one side with a movement so abrupt that her bones creaked as if she had no tendons to hold them. But what truly broke him completely was something that happened to him nights later. He said he was doing his round when he heard a dull thud, as if someone had thrown their body to the floor. He approached the room where he had heard that, and inside there was a woman hunched over something Leonardo didn't want to describe, although it was as if she were touching an invisible body. When he touched her with the flashlight, the woman stood up slowly, and he could see her face. He says that woman had no eyes, only dark sockets that seemed to sink infinitely inward, as if that were more of a tunnel than eyes. Her mouth was twisted to one side, open, but without making a sound. Even so, my brother-in-law felt the crying directly inside his ear, as if the woman were crying inside his head. He ran out of there without looking back, and he swears that while he was running, he heard footsteps following him, but they weren't normal footsteps, they were like irregular blows, bones hitting the concrete. Since that day, my brother-in-law refused to return to that prison, requested a shift change zones, and left that place. But even though a lot of time has passed and he is very far from that place, he says that from time to time he has dreams about that woman, about that thing he saw in the penitentiary, that he believes that woman stuck to him, that her energy was chasing him and is still following him to this day, for he doesn't know exactly what that thing is that inhabits there. If the legend is true, it must be the ghost of that woman who took her own life, but if not, it must be something more malignant, more evil, and it wouldn't surprise me. Well, I mean, a prison is a place full of pain, death, and sadness, and it is possible that things, entities, demons inhabit it that only wait to attach themselves to someone. And in this case, it was my brother-in-law, Leonardo. Good evening, CH family. My name is Yvonne, and what happened to me in 2002, when I had only been in the corporation for 6 months, was what made me understand that In this job, you don't just have to be afraid of criminals or bullets or confrontations, you also have to be afraid of things that no longer exist in this world. Although this story has been with me for some time now, I still have it very present. In 2012, I had barely been working as a municipal police officer in Gomez Palacio, Durango, for about 6 months. At that time, things were very hot because there were many organized crime groups that were emerging, and we had to be very alert to any situation that might arise every day. One night I was doing a routine night patrol together with my partner Giselle, and it was at that moment that something very disturbing happened to us. The two of us were patrolling the loneliest neighborhoods, through the vacant lots, on the outskirts of the town where there is almost no light or people, only old houses, empty lots, and unpaved streets. It was about 2 inches the morning, and we were patrolling through the Miraval neighborhood toward the Ejido area, near the Sacramento Canal. We were talking nonsense to keep ourselves awake when suddenly the radio crackled with desperate voices, a voice cut off by static asking for urgent support. It said they were under fire and that they had been ambushed, that they needed reinforcements immediately because they didn't know how much longer they could hold out. Giselle and I looked at each other without saying anything, but he automatically stepped on the accelerator, and I warned the command that some colleagues were asking for help, that we were on our way, and to send more units and an ambulance. From the central office, they responded that support was on the way, but they were a bit far away and it would take them a few minutes to arrive. I didn't think. I just drove as fast as I could, right to the zone where they had told us they were attacking them. The location they gave us was on the outskirts of town, through a dirt area full of vacant lots near the old municipal dump. As we approached, the atmosphere became somewhat strange, heavy, as if the air were very cold. I remember that no dogs could be heard, there was no sound of music or cars, nothing. The noise of the engine and the siren was the only thing we heard, which is strange in that direction. When we arrived at the marked point, I slowed down, expecting to see shot-up patrol cars, wounded colleagues, people running, but there was nothing. Absolutely nothing, not a patrol car, not lights, not casings, only empty streets and brush around. I parked. J.C.O. got out first with his weapon in his hand. I followed him, aiming everywhere, expecting that at any moment they would come out shooting at us. I tried to communicate by radio with those who had asked us for help. Requesting unit, this is Bravo 12. Respond. Where are you? Over. Over. But nothing. Only static. We tried it again and again, but with no response. We started to patrol the neighborhood slowly, going around in circles, checking every street, every vacant lot, every abandoned house. 15 minutes passed, then 20, and we didn't find absolutely anything, not even traces of a confrontation. It was as if nothing had happened that night. When the reinforcements arrived, there were already several patrol cars touring the area without knowing what to say. I felt a knot in my stomach, as I didn't know how to explain to them that we had arrived for an emergency that simply didn't exist. The commander asked us who had requested support, what unit it was, and I could only tell him that we didn't know, that no one answered our call, that the radio had remained silent, and they just told us they needed reinforcements. We returned to the command with a horrible feeling, as if of failure, as if we had looked like fools. We sat down to fill out the logbook, to draft the report, trying to explain what happened without sounding ridiculous. While we were writing, a veteran officer, one of those who already has gray hair and many scars, Don Victor, approached us and started reading what we were writing over our shoulder. He didn't say anything at first, just sighed. Then he looked at me seriously and asked me if the voice we heard asking for help with desperation, if gunshots could be heard in the background, if it seemed like they were surrounded. I told him yes. Exactly. That was the call we received. Then he told me that he did believe us, that we weren't crazy, that we hadn't invented anything. But what we heard that night was not a call that came from that moment. It was a call from 4 years ago. He told us that at that same point near the dump, 2 police officers had been ambushed by an armed group. They managed to ask for help by radio. They screamed and asked them to hurry, but the reinforcement arrived late. When they arrived, they only found the shot-up patrol cars and the lifeless bodies. Since then, according to the officer, from time to time on those early mornings, someone hears that same call again, the same voice, the same words, as if their colleagues were still asking for help without knowing that no one could save them. Throughout all my years working as an officer, I heard this same story other times. Many colleagues received a distress call, but when they went to the scene of the incident, they say they found nothing, absolutely nothing other than the dark night. So this story has truly happened many times, and we weren't crazy because the two of us, my colleague and I, lived it firsthand. Family, I invite you to be part of the members of the channel and enjoy all the benefits it has. For example, like seeing your name that is appearing at this moment. We continue. My dad has been a police officer for almost 40 years, and in all this time he has lived through some very strange things, but above all, supernatural ones. This, he says, happened to him in the year 2008, when I was just a child. At that time, my dad was a preventative police officer in Mexico City and worked in the area of the Doctors neighborhood, near the old streets that surround what used to be private clinics and small hospitals, places where, it is said, many ugly things happened, where many people died without help, without medical attention, and without anyone being held responsible. To top it off, my dad says that he was traveling through those streets, carrying out what is known as the night shift. It was around 11 at night when he and his partner, Officer Suarez, were doing their normal round, very slowly with the patrol car's low-beam lights, checking solitary streets with closed businesses and empty sidewalks as it was already late. It was a cold night with light fog and a strange silence, one of those that makes you feel uncomfortable without knowing why. The two of them were talking to keep from falling asleep when suddenly they heard a loud scream. They heard a woman's loud and desperate scream that sounded like the lament of someone about to pass away. The two looked at each other at the same time, and my dad accelerated. He turned down the radio volume and began to follow those screams. They turned several corners until they heard it again, much closer. They say it was coming from an almost abandoned street where there was an old building that used to be a private hospital, but now it was closed with broken windows, stained walls, and a heavy atmosphere that could be felt from afar. And exactly there they saw it, lying on the edge of the street, moving very weakly on a dark puddle, complaining and breathing with difficulty. There was a woman. It was a woman of about 30 or 40 years old, more or less, with her clothes totally soaked in blood, with her hair stuck to her face and her eyes wide open. Upon approaching, they realized she was bleeding a lot, and at first they thought it was an attack or an accident, until she screamed again and brought her hands to her belly. The woman was surprisingly giving birth right there on the street, alone and in the middle of the cold. My dad asked for an ambulance immediately, gave the location, and requested support. The command told him the ambulance was already on the way, but in the meantime they should provide support to the woman. For her part, that woman breathed heavily. She was very sweaty and kept repeating that she couldn't take it anymore, that the baby was already coming. As there was no time or option, and although my dad only had basic knowledge of first aid and had never attended a birth, he knelt in front of the woman, breathed deeply, and positioned himself as best he could, while his partner Jaciel tried to calm the woman, telling her that everything was fine even though he himself didn't believe those words. The woman pushed with all her strength, screamed, arched her back, and in a matter of seconds the baby was born. My dad received it with trembling hands. He says it was a small boy, purple and covered in blood, but alive because he started to cry with a strong cry. For an instant my dad felt relief, since that night something unusual had happened in his work, but something very beautiful. Then he wrapped him in his jacket and took him to the patrol car to protect him from the cold. Meanwhile, his partner continued with the woman, talking to her and waiting together for the ambulance. Everything seemed to end well until the woman started to laugh. But my dad says it wasn't a normal nervous laugh. That was a mocking guffaw, as if she were mocking them. My dad turned around, puzzled, and at that moment felt something strange in his hands, an intense heat, as if he were holding something scalding. Quickly, he lowered his gaze and screamed in pure fright, because he says that in his hands he no longer had a baby, now he had meat, blood, and hot organs dripping between his fingers. There was no head, arms, or body, only remains, as if the child had turned into that. Full of fear, my dad says he dropped it suddenly, took a step back, and fell to the ground. His partner ran toward him, and when both turned to see the woman, they say she was no longer there. There was not even a trace of where she had been, no mark, not even the blood she had expelled, only the empty, cold, and dark street. The ambulance arrived in a matter of minutes, but they didn't find anything either. At the command, they thought they were tired, agitated, and that they had hallucinated what they saw. and they mocked my father and his partner all night because no one could believe them. The strange thing, my dad says, is that many police officers time later have said that those streets are haunted and always at night. And that is something he didn't know at the time it was where everything that happened took place. It was in front of a building that they say had been a private hospital a long time ago, many years ago, but it only served those who could pay for it, leaving pregnant women, the sick, and the wounded to their fate at the entrance of the facilities, and many died for not receiving the corresponding attention. They passed away in front of the sidewalk without help or compassion. In fact, it was because of all those complaints that were made to their hospital that it eventually closed, and the building was simply left abandoned. Since then, they say that ugly things are heard and seen on that street. My dad is one of several police officers who say they have heard and seen the same woman, although it is not always the same apparition. Some of his colleagues say they have seen shot-up men, others men in wheelchairs, and others more women who are crying in a white gown in front of that hospital. Whatever the truth is that the street is haunted, to this day more cases of this type continue to appear. If you are enjoying the story, you help us a lot by giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you consider it, and we have earned it, you can also hype our videos so more of the community can hear us. We continue. Very good evening, CH family. My name is Ernesto, and I want to share a story that my grandfather Eduardo has come to tell me, which he says happened to him when he was young and worked as a police officer. My grandfather was a rural police officer in northern Coahuila for many years. He says that around 1995 he worked in an area near San Buenaventura, through the roads that connect with small ejidos and ranches, where at night there is nothing but dust, brush, howling coyotes, and roads that seem to never end or have no end. At that time, many patrols were done on his motorcycle because he says it was faster, spent much less gasoline, and he could get into paths where patrol cars didn't go. One night, according to what he told me, he was not officially on duty. It was already about 8, and he was returning home after making a last round of the routine. Everything was calm when he took the road toward the La Palma Ejido. By then the sun had gone, the sky was dark, and only an orange strip remained on the horizon. My grandfather turned on the motorcycle lights and moved very calmly along the road, thinking about arriving, eating something, and resting. But that was when he saw something extremely strange. He says that in the distance on the road was a man riding a gray horse. At first glance, it looked like a normal peasant, a palm hat, old shirt, and denim pants. But the strange thing is that the horse was pulling a wooden cart and running at full speed. That was not a normal trot. It was not a fast pace. It was an uncontrolled race, as if someone were chasing them. My grandfather thought immediately that that was dangerous. The road was dark without lighting, and that man could cause an accident at any moment. Although he was no longer on his shift, he decided to do the right thing and accelerated a bit and activated the siren so that the man on the horse would stop. My grandfather made the siren sound several times, waiting for the peasant to turn or reduce the speed, but nothing happened. On the contrary, the horse started to run even faster. Surprised, he accelerated the motorcycle, thinking that he would reach him in a matter of seconds, but no matter how much he stepped on it, he couldn't get close. It was as if the cart and the horse were being pushed by something invisible, moving further away every time it seemed that he already had him a few meters away. In fact, that was the first thing that really disturbed him, because he knew perfectly well that a horse with a cart shouldn't be faster than his bike, and nevertheless, it was doing it. After several minutes, the peasant turned off the main road and entered a dirt path. My grandfather doubted for an instant, but decided to follow him, thinking that on that narrow stretch he could finally reach him and make him stop. My grandfather got in behind, kicking up dust, feeling how the bike jumped between the stones. The path was completely dark, without poles, without houses, without any movement, only brush, old fences, and the sound of the engine breaking the silence. The silhouette of the horse and the cart could barely be distinguished with the lights, like a long shadow that moved forward without getting tired. As he advanced, my grandfather started to recognize that path. He had traveled it many times and knew exactly where it led. He says that further ahead there was a dangerous curve, and after it a deep ravine of more than 30 meters. When he realized it, he felt his stomach knotting. He started screaming at the man to stop. He touched the siren with desperation and accelerated as much as he could, but he couldn't reach him. Every meter he advanced was getting closer to the void, and the lights were already managing to illuminate the edge of that path where the ground simply ended. Seeing what was coming further ahead, he understood that if he continued like that, the peasant, the horse, and the cart would go directly into the ravine, and he too, if he didn't brake. So he took the decision to stop quickly. My grandfather braked the motorcycle hard, skidded a bit, and remained motionless with his heart pounding in his chest and his eyes fixed straight ahead, waiting to hear the impact of that cart. Again, he started screaming for him to stop, but the noise didn't seem to reach the ears of that peasant. When the cart was a few centimeters from that abyss, he only expected the impact to hear the noise. But my grandfather says that the horse continued advancing. The cart rolled a few meters, and just before reaching the edge of the ravine, he says it disappeared without making a sound, only leaving a trail of dust. My grandfather remained paralyzed by what he was seeing. He pointed the light toward the ravine and didn't see remains of anything. It was as if the peasant and everyone had disappeared just like that, as if everyone were ghosts. My grandfather got off the motorcycle with his legs trembling and walked a few steps and looked down the ravine, hoping to find something, a possible answer, a sign that everything he had seen was real, but he only found darkness as if nothing had ever happened there. My grandfather turned in all directions trying to find that cart, that peasant, or the gray horse, but he says there was nothing, only darkness in the field. At that instant, I felt a terrible fear, a very strong cold, and this made me understand that what I had seen very likely was a ghost cart that had been following for kilometers and kilometers, and that just before hitting the ravine, it disappeared before his very eyes. My grandfather, without knowing what it was exactly that he saw, had no choice but to return home, and when he did, he didn't tell anyone anything. For many years he never said anything about it because he thought they would tell him he was crazy, but he swore that night, indeed, he had seen a ghost cart in the middle of that ejido. According to the legend of these places, community, a long time ago, when all these were small ranches that moved by carts, more than one fell down that ravine, because that path has always been very dangerous due to the curve, and when you don't know it, you always go straight and end up at the bottom of that cliff. My grandfather believes that was what he saw that night. Some poor soul of some poor wretch who had died long ago at that site, but this is not certain for him and neither for me. However, the clearest and most basic answer he wants to give himself to know that he is not crazy and that what he saw truly exists or at some point did exist. CH family, I remind you that we have new videos every day and live shows every night on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We wait for you to tell us your story. We continue. I never thought that something as simple as a foot patrol would mark me for life. I never thought that only bad people walk the streets, but that many times evil is where you can't see it. Good evening, community. My name is Vidal, and this happened to me when I had been a little more than a year in the police corporation in the municipality of San Nicolas in the state of Aguascalientes. Among my activities was patrolling the old neighborhood, the one where the houses are quite small, the streets are poorly lit, and at night almost no one is seen. A quiet sector in appearance, but with many reports of robberies and vandalism. So, almost always they sent us on foot patrols to have a presence, as they say. Well, the bosses didn't like us constantly reporting crimes from that site. That night, it was my turn with my partner Luis to do that round. Both of us already had experience, but in this job you always learn something new. It was around 10 at night, more or less. The shift was heavy, it was cold, and there was a light fog that didn't let you see very well into the distance. We left the patrol car, parked near a closed store, and started walking through the streets checking corners, alleys, and vacant lots. We were talking quietly, more to get rid of the cold than anything else, but after a few blocks was when we saw that for the first time. Under a streetlight, we saw a large black dog with long and dirty hair standing without moving and looking at us fixedly. That one didn't bark, didn't move its tail, didn't approach, it just watched in silence. At first, we didn't give it importance because in that neighborhood there were always stray dogs, so we kept walking normally. However, upon turning the corner and looking back, we saw it following us about 20 meters away, advancing slowly without making a noise, as if it were watching us. We thought maybe it was looking for food or that it was just curious, but as we advanced, the dog was still there, always at the same distance, no closer and no further. That started to make us uncomfortable because it wasn't normal. It didn't behave like a common dog that barks, runs, and leaves, but this one walked very straight, in silence, with its head raised. as if it knew exactly where we were going and was accompanying us on purpose. Afterward, we entered a somewhat darker zone, houses without poles where the atmosphere felt heavier and the air colder. Only our footsteps could be heard. It was there when Luis told me that dog walked strangely, and upon looking better, I realized that it didn't move like an animal. It didn't go hunched over, it didn't sway its body. It advanced rigidly, with its back straight, as if it were a person trying to imitate a dog. I felt a chill run down my spine, but we kept walking. Now faster, and the animal also accelerated without panting or showing fatigue. A few minutes passed, and the dog didn't deviate or stay behind. At the corner we stopped, and it also stopped at the same time. Under a weak light, it raised its head and looked directly at our eyes, not like an animal, but like a person, with a conscious, thinking look, as if it knew who we were and we weren't afraid. I swallowed saliva. I tried to joke, saying that it seemed like one, but Luis didn't laugh because he was also scared. We kept walking through the alley full of trash and graffiti where we were only illuminated by our flashlights. The dog kept following us, barely visible in the dark, until suddenly we heard a noise, and upon turning Community, we saw it upright, a little taller than normal, as if for an instant it had stood on 2 legs. And when we pointed our light at it, it lowered back down as if nothing had happened. But at that moment, the fear turned into panic. We started walking, almost running with our hearts in our throats, expecting that at any moment that dog would jump on us. I felt like something horrible was going to happen, but luckily nothing happened to us. That dog never attacked us. It only followed us, watching us, accompanying us in silence, as if it had some purpose we didn't understand. After almost an hour, we finally arrived at the patrol car. We climbed in fast and locked the doors. We started the engine with our hands trembling, and we left that place. Upon looking in the rearview mirror, there it was again, that dog standing in front of us a few meters away, looking at us fixedly. Then it turned slowly and walked away very calmly, as if it had already finished doing what it came to do with us. We stayed in silence for several minutes without saying anything. In the end, Luis asked me what I thought that was, and I could only tell him that it wasn't a normal dog. I have never been much of a believer in paranormal things. I know what one is, but I don't believe much in that. However, that night, that dog, Community, I know it stood on 2 legs and was walking like that for a long while. The theory I have together with my partner is that possibly a Nayul man lives in that neighborhood, and precisely this man turned into a dog was stalking us the whole time, perhaps watching so we wouldn't do anything wrong, perhaps waiting for us to leave, or simply being nosy. The thing is, and what I can assure, is that dog was not a common and ordinary dog. It was something else. Something that thought like a person, but looked like a dog. If you have any story that you wish to share with this pleasant community, I invite you to send it, either by email or the Facebook page. I would appreciate it if you activate all notifications to be up to date with the stories that are uploaded daily. Thank you very much for letting me reach your ears.